Welcome to the After the Noise podcast. I'm Dr. Jen Bradley, licensed psychologist, and this is where we talk about everything your GLP-1 is changing besides the number on the scale. Today I want to tell you about a message I received. A woman, 67 years old, wrote to me after reading one of my articles. And one line in her message has stayed with me for weeks. She said that after a lifetime of putting everyone else first, she was finally counting herself in. I want to sit with that phrase for this whole episode because I think it might be the most useful 3 words I've heard in this entire body of work. Most of what we talk about here names something hard: grief, distrust, fear. And all of that is real, and all of it deserves airtime. But today, I want to talk about something we don't say enough on this podcast and don't say enough in this culture at all. We're going to talk about joy. Specifically, the joy of finally being in your own equation. Let's start where most of us learn to leave ourselves out of it. Think about a decision you made this week. Any decision. What to make for dinner. Whether to go to the thing you didn't feel like going to. Whether to sit down for 10 minutes or keep moving because there was one more thing to do. Now ask yourself honestly, when you made that decision, did your own needs get a seat at the table? Or did you calculate everyone else's needs first and then fit yourself into whatever space was left over, if there was any space at all? For most of us, the answer is the second one. And we've been doing that for so long, so automatically, that we stopped noticing we were doing it. We think of it as being a good mother, a good partner, a good employee, a good daughter. We rarely think of it as a decision. It feels more like a law of nature. Of course I go last. Everyone goes last for someone. Except that's not true. Some people don't go last. And the difference isn't selfishness, it's socialization. Girls are taught from very early on to notice what everyone else needs, to manage the emotional temperature of a room, to give. Boys are taught to lead, to take up space, to want things and go get them. None of us chose that training. We were handed it before we were old enough to question it. So by the time we're adults, we have decades of practice at leaving ourselves out. And most of us never had a single moment where we consciously decided that our needs belonged in the room too. We just kept going, one omission at a time, until omission became identity. Here's where the GLP-1 journey does something interesting. For a lot of women, starting this medication is the first time in years they've made a decision that was entirely, unapologetically about themselves. Not for the kids, not for a partner, not because a doctor scared them into it at a checkup. A decision they made for their own body because they were done living the way they'd been living. And that decision cracks something open. Because once you've made one decision that centers you, it gets a little easier to notice all the places where you still don't. That's what happened to the woman who wrote to me. She didn't say the medication changed her body and left it there. She said something bigger had shifted. She'd spent her whole life counting everyone else in, first, always, without question. And somewhere in this journey, she started counting herself in too. I want to be specific about what that looks like because it's not dramatic, it's not fireworks, it's small, ordinary moments where the decision changes. It's making the doctor's appointment for yourself instead of letting it slide for the 3rd month in a row. It's sitting down to eat the meal you made instead of eating standing up at the counter while everyone else eats at the table. It's saying, I need 20 minutes, and not following it with 3 sentences of apology. None of that looks like much from the outside, but from the inside, it's enormous. It's the sound of a woman being added back into her own life after being quietly subtracted from it for years. Now, I want to talk about what actually gets in the way of this. Because if it were simple, none of us would still be having this conversation in our 40s, 50s, or 60s. And what gets in the way is not a lack of desire. Every woman I've worked with wants this. What gets in the way is guilt. Here's what that guilt sounds like, in case you haven't put words to it yet. It sounds like, if I take this time, someone else goes without. It sounds like, wanting this for myself makes me selfish. It sounds like, everyone else's needs are urgent and mine can wait because mine have always been able to wait. I want you to notice something about all 3 of those thoughts. None of them are facts. They're beliefs. And they were installed a long time ago by watching the women who raised you go without, by workplaces that rewarded you for endless availability, by a culture that has never once made a movie where the mother's needs were the plot. So when the guilt shows up the first time you try to count yourself in, I don't want you to take it as a sign that you did something wrong. I want you to take it as a sign that you're doing something new. Guilt in this context is not a moral alarm telling you to stop. It's an old program running on outdated information, telling you that a rule is being broken. The rule was never true. It just ran uncontested for a very long time. There's a concept I've talked about before on this podcast, the space between. It's that uncomfortable stretch where the old version of you doesn't quite fit anymore, and the new version isn't fully formed yet. Self-prioritization lives right in the middle of that space. The old you knew exactly how to disappear into everyone else's needs. That was familiar, even when it was exhausting. The new you, the one who takes up a little room, hasn't had enough practice yet to feel natural. So it feels wrong, even when it's right. This is the part that often isn't addressed. The discomfort you feel the first few times you prioritize yourself is not evidence that you're being selfish. It's evidence that you're building a muscle that was never allowed to develop. So how do you move through it? Not by waiting for the guilt to disappear before you act, because it won't disappear first. It fades after you've acted enough times that the new behavior stops feeling foreign. You move through it by acting anyway, in small enough doses that you can tolerate the discomfort without abandoning the attempt. This is where worthiness comes in, the belief that your needs deserve consideration in the first place. That belief doesn't arrive through a single decision or a single week of trying. It arrives through repetition. Every time you choose yourself in a small moment and the world doesn't end, and the people you love are still there, and nothing catastrophic happens, the belief gets a little more evidence behind it. You are not talking yourself into worthiness. You are proving it to yourself, one ordinary decision at a time. There's a tool I want to leave you with, and it's simple on purpose, because complicated tools don't get used. Before you commit to something this week, pause and ask yourself one question. Have I included my own needs in this decision? That's it. Not, are my needs the only thing that matters? Not, should I put myself first every time? Just, are my needs represented at all? Or did I skip that step entirely, the way I've skipped it for years without noticing? And when the guilt shows up right after you ask that question, which it likely will the first several times, I want you to greet it differently than you have in the past. Instead of treating it as proof you shouldn't have asked, treat it as confirmation that you're standing exactly where the old rule used to live unopposed. That discomfort is not a stop sign. It's a marker of the exact place where change is happening. Some days the answer to the question will be no. That's fine. Notice it. Awareness is the whole game at first. You don't have to overhaul your life this week. You just have to start counting and keep counting, even on the days the guilt is loud. I think about that phrase often, counting herself in. Not because it's poetic, though it is, because it names something so many of us have been waiting our whole lives for permission to do, and it turns out the permission was ours to give the entire time. The guilt that shows up when we finally give it isn't a verdict, it's just the sound of an old rule losing its grip. It's never too late to come into your own. Not at 30, not at 50, not at 67. The woman who wrote to me is proof of that, and I suspect some of you listening are proof of it too, whether you've said it out loud yet or not. Next week, we're going to stay in the same domain and talk about what happens when life gets busy and the habits you've built start slipping. Not as failure, as something with a name and a fix. I'm Dr. Jen Bradley. Thank you for listening to After the Noise. I'll see you next week.